in Toronto, when I played high school football, and I was on some successful city championship teams. I played on a couple of hockey programs, did a little bit of track and field and basketball. So I was sort of engaged in a variety of things. And when I went to university, I somehow had this feeling that I should do something very different. This was a new beginning of my life where I was beginning to study things that I was wanting to focus on. And I thought I'd maybe try something different. And I remember seeing a sign at the University of Western Ontario as a freshman that said, "Rowing, desire is the only prerequisite." And I wasn't quite sure what prerequisite meant. And I could translate that into bloody hard work. So I decided to go out for the University of Western Ontario Rowing Club. And it was fabulous because the people that went out to Fanshawe Lake, which was about 20 miles outside of London, were fabulous people who did things a little bit differently. There were a lot of medical students. There were a lot of other sort of individualistic types of individuals. So instead of playing college football or college basketball, I decided to try this sport, and I loved it. It was the fall, you're out on an Ontario lake, leaves were changing, the lake was, where the boathouse was an orchard. It was a gorgeous setting, and I really enjoyed it, and I kept rowing in the summer in the breaks between school semesters, and I kept getting better and better. I was always successful, and that surprised me a little bit, that somehow I always seemed to be on winning teams and stroking winning boats. And at one point, when I had graduated from Western and went to Toronto, I remember thinking, this is an Olympic year, and maybe, just maybe, I should think about trying to make the Olympic team. The only medal Canada won at the Olympic Games in Rome in 1960, when I was a freshman, was a silver medal by the University of British Columbia men's rowing's eights. And I think that stimulated me a little bit to think of rowing and then think of Western. So 4 years later, when the opportunity came to train again and try to make an Olympic team and go to the Olympic Games in Tokyo, I decided to buy a one-way ticket. And I should correct myself, my mother decided I should buy a one-way ticket and leave Toronto and go to Vancouver and try to make the Olympic team, and I did. This was really exciting because I had never been west of Toronto or Western Ontario, London, Ontario, and it was my first opportunity to go out. And I flew out, and I remember arriving on a Saturday, and in those days the planes landed in Winnipeg before they got to Vancouver, right? So this was way back when. And I remember sleeping on the floor of a friend of mine who had gone to school with me at Western. He offered his living room floor for me to sleep on Saturday night. And Sunday morning I went out to the boat club, which is in Cole Harbour, right in the center of the harbour of Vancouver, right at Stanley Park. And you can imagine me walking into a boathouse that had been built in the 1880s on pilings in Vancouver Harbour, and joining a group of athletes who had won Pan American and Commonwealth Games medals, and some of them were Olympic medalists from the 1960 Olympic Games in Rome. And the day was absolutely brilliant, Vancouver. Bright sunshine, sun on the mountains, still snow in the mountains. This was May, just after my university exams. And I remember going out on the water, and I was put in the second boat, the second eight. I wasn't put in the big eight, all the Olympic people. And I thought, this is so neat. And I remember rowing out to Second Narrows Bridge and back, and realizing that I was competitive with these people, that for genes and good living, I had a tremendous endurance capability, which was one of the reasons why I was successful as an athlete. I didn't realize that at the time, but I was somebody that could really go hard for a long period of time. And I just kept working my way up through the system, and ended up eventually winning the right to go to Tokyo to row the para event at the Olympic Games in October 1964. I had rowed in a 4. The University of British Columbia had an 8 and a 4 that competed in the Olympic trials in St. Catharines in August of 1964. And unfortunately, the bowman of our four sprained his back 2 days before we were to race the Olympic race, and we had to put a spare person in the boat. And the spare person couldn't hold the power and the speed and the pace that we were rowing. And we started out in lane 4 and ended in lane 1, and more importantly, ended up second in the race and not qualified to go to Tokyo. So I wouldn't say devastated, but I was really very disappointed that circumstances had affected us, because I honestly believed our four was an Olympic medal winning four. We'd competed against the best Americans. We had done extremely well leading up to that particular trials race. So I was hugely dejected and thought, well, that's life, you get on with it. And then I was selected from the four to row a pair, which was really the spare boat in case anybody got injured or something happened in the 8. And it eventually ended up 6 weeks later, and when we went to Tokyo, that we were entered to race the pair race. And so all of a sudden, coming from the depths of frustration to the fact, holy smokes, here we are in an Olympic race. And this was our first real international event. So we got into our first race having no idea how we were going to do. We had never raced the Europeans before. We'd only raced Americans, and it was going to be quite a novel experience. We won our first heat by quite a margin, and actually our winning time was faster than all of the other heats. So we had an expectation in the final that if we could really concentrate well and row well, we would be in this thing, that we were going to be competitive. When we got to the final race, I remember sitting on the start line, and we were quite nervous, obviously. We were just swimming in adrenaline. This was really exciting. We were against the European champions, the Dutch and the Germans, who were very, very strong. We had beaten a couple of the other teams in the race. And on the start, the starter says, "Êtes-vous partez?" and drops a flag and gives a signal to go off. And after we'd taken the first stroke or two, my partner, George Hungerford, I'm rowing out of one side of the boat, he's rowing out of the other, so we have to be terribly coordinated. He, what they call, caught a crab. He had sort of looked over to see where we were in the first 3 or 4 strokes and had misjudged the stroke, and his oar grabbed the water and stopped our boat. But the referee at that time stopped the race because someone had left early, and he called the boats back to restart the race. So I can remember turning around to George and saying, if you don't, I was 2 years older than him. I was 22, he was 20. And I just sort of blew it. This would keep your eyes in the boat and just pull, right? So we took off like scalded cats. I mean, we just bombed. And at 500 meters, we were ahead by a couple of seconds. At 1,000 meters, we were ahead by 3 seconds. At 1,500 meters, we were ahead by 4 or 5 seconds over the whole field. And he was beginning to tire at that point, and we were beginning to edge out of our lane. So we had a couple of dramatic moments of, do we take the stroke up? Do we keep it the same? And so on. And we won. Thank God. But it was close for a second because the Dutch, who had been the European champions, made a tremendous push at the end and almost caught us. And the third place team was way behind, and 4th and 5th and 6th were behind. So it was an incredibly exciting moment. And when we crossed the finish line, I sort of thought, I almost blew the race, because at the end of the race, I was trying to debate whether to take the stroke up and to have our own sprint, or whether George would be overwhelmed in the race. We didn't have a rudder in our boat. We're the only pair in the history of Olympic pair competition that didn't row with a steering mechanism on the boat. And we did that because we wanted to train to balance the power so that both of us would apply power and force identical. It's like a pair figure skating. If one of them is not in total synchronization, then the pair doesn't work, and it's the same in rowing.